Hello again. Welcome everybody to DAT Poker Podcast, episode 4, September 13th, 2018. I'm your host, Dave Schwartz, alongside our producer, Roscoe P. Coltrane.
Hello, boys and girls.
And Mr. Terrence Chan. T, how are you?
Howdy ho, neighbor Reno. I'm doing great, wrestling babies and wrestling adults.
Awesome. And Mr. Daniel Negreanu in Las Vegas. Daniel, in the middle of the Poker Masters series. How's it going, sir?
I just got out of a chair and pulled my groin. Terrence, I need help. This never happened when I was 25 years old. I don't know what's going on, but I'll be all right.
Daniel, I stopped pulling other people's groins a long time ago. I don't know about you, but that experimentation part of my life is over.
You're in college?
Exactly. Yeah, I only pull my own groin now.
Speaking of pulling groins, Daniel, we talked last week about you had a date lined up for Monday.
Excellent segue. Well done, sir.
Segue right into a date trip. First of all, how do you have a date in the middle of the Poker Masters? Were you busy?
Well, it was the short deck, and if you've never played short deck before, it's impossible to win, except that's the opposite of true because everyone who's never played seems to win one. But she was in town for a very short period of time and was leaving that Tuesday morning. So it was the only opportunity I had, really, because she lives in Nashville. And listen, it's just a poker tournament, right? There's going to be plenty of those, and I didn't want to pass up on the opportunity.
And give us the rundown. How did it go?
Okay, so it was interesting because I picked her up, old-fashioned style. Picked her up
Door?
In Henderson. I did open the door the whole day. I even freaking went up to the doorbell and rang it, no flowers or nothing like that. I'm not going crazy, nothing crazy. And so I took her over to the Wynn because the Wynn is my go-to because the Wynn has every restaurant there has like a really wide selection of menus for meat eaters and vegans alike. So it works for me. So I took her. Is
she a meat eater? Real quick, is she a meat eater?
She's currently one. Yeah, she's enrollable
until you get done with her.
She didn't eat any meat on the date. She ordered from the vegan menu, but I took her to Sinatra's, which is a really nice spot in Encore, and we ordered some wine. We got there like 7, and we were at dinner till like 11. Then we played some blackjack for a couple hours, and then had a few more drinks later. And I dropped her off around 3:30. It was like there was a 5-minute period where I was like, oh shit, this can't work. But other than that, it was really great. And the 5-minute period when something like, I don't know, she started talking about Kaepernick for some reason. I didn't bring up anything political. She brought up Kaepernick and then mentioned something about Obama. And she said like, oh, I wasn't a fan. And I asked her what she thought of Trump. And she's like, I don't mind him. And I was like, oh, for shit.
Wow.
But then I realized like she's young. She's 27. She doesn't follow politics at all. And, I think a lot of it has to do with just family influence. But when I asked her, like, what was it about Obama she didn't really was a fan of? And she's like, I don't know. I just didn't feel like he was authentic. And so I kind of chimed in with like somewhat respectful, but I said, so, what his measured, calm, thoughtful, well thought out responses, I could see how that could be, authentic to some people rather than rabid, insane kind of off the cuff remarks. But yeah, we changed the subject very, very, very quickly and had a good time for the rest of the night.
All right. The date went well, and you dropped her off fairly late there. So seeing her again, what's going on? She's in Nashville. How do you manage?
Hey, Adam, before you interrupted, do you have the same thought that I was that the deal breaker had nothing to do with politics, and it was more like she wanted just really badly to like stand on a 16 versus a 7?
No, she was better at blackjack than me, actually. You know what she did? She doesn't even know that she developed it, but she was using a martingale to solid martingale. And I told her I invented that when I was 16. Because when I was 16, I was playing blackjack, and I sort of came up with the system where you can't lose 6 hands in a row. And if you don't lose 6 hands in a row, you'll never – it was just this genius system. I wrote papers and stuff. She did a martingale. She started with a $100 chip, and she's like, I'm not leaving until we have a yellow, which is a $1,000 chip. Yeah. She took that $100 and ran it up to 2 yellows. So she won $2,000. I did not win. She says, you're not doing it right. That's why. Because I wasn't upping my bets.
My favorite thing about the martingale strategy is anytime you read about somebody martingaling the internet, there's always like a guy who will come out and say, oh, the reason why martingales don't work is because casinos have table maximums. And if you lose enough times to hit the table maximum, then your martingale will fail. I'm like, that is not the reason martingales don't work. But good on you for the practical thing anyway. If you can hit the table limit, like that's
martingales work is there's a finite supply of money.
Yeah, that is a big part of it. Exactly.
Well, having said that, though, if you like, say for example, and I'm not going to like necessarily recommend this to people, but if you needed like $100, let's say you had like $4,900, and you needed 5,000 to pay this guy like KGB, or you're going to like get your legs broken.
Absolutely.
A martingale is a great idea to win that $100 because like 99% of the time you're going to win. The problem is that other 1% you're going to be with zero. So if 0 and 4,900 is essentially of equal value to you in that moment, then martingale away.
Yeah, it's hard to find circumstances where that would actually be true because there do exist people who will, like other people who will give you another high interest loan. So you just pay off like that next high interest loan. And that's, we're essentially just getting into like the cycle of poverty and how that works. But like, yeah, even if Teddy KGB is going to break your legs in an hour, you could probably go find the 100 from some other KGB type and then pay him later.
Hey, can I ask Daniel a question? You mentioned it sort of off the cuff. Did you write a paper on martingaling?
Oh my goodness. When I was a teenager and I was figuring out gambling. I was betting sports, booking sports, the whole deal. So I wrote out like, no computer programs. We didn't have that stuff. I didn't even have a computer. I literally wrote out like, betting structures and systems that essentially was a martingale with a $5 betting increment system. So it was like 5 if you lose 10, if you lose 20, if you lose so you'd always make $5 in the end. And then I factored in how doubling down. Actually, this is really stupid, but I wouldn't double down. So I was actually, just. So if I had like $40 out there and I had like an 11 against a 6, hit me, right? So it wasn't a good system.
It's awesome because I feel, Daniel, like if we didn't grow up on opposite sides of the country, approximately 10 years apart, like we would have made a fantastic tandem duo because I remember betting on like sports lottery when I was in the 3rd grade, and the shit that you and I could have come up with if our little like childhood minds could have gotten together would have been we would either be broke and destitute on the streets, or we would go down as the greatest gambling tandem of all time.
Are you kidding me? Considering there was a lot of dumber people than us, I think around there, I think we would have done just fine.
I remember I was booking. I mean, I hope the statute of limitations has expired on this, but I was essentially like the high school bookie in grade 9.
Yeah, so was I. The parlay cards, the football parlay cards, right?
Yeah,
pick
fantastic.
4 teams, you get 10-1. Get your parlay tickets right here. Get your tickets.
Oh man, and you're so much less risk averse when you're that age.
Moving on, guys. Last week we talked about the old Italian guy, Daniel, that need you under the table. But some of the people who were on Twitter were asking what you ended up doing. I don't think we ever figured out if you said anything to the guy or just sort of ignored it. What did end up happening?
Yeah, well, I guess you're right. I didn't exactly. I was very uncomfortable and didn't really know what to do. And the guy was smiley and nice, and like I was considering all the options, and I just didn't feel right to call the floor. And, I should have, that's what I said. I don't feel like I handled it all that well. That's why I wanted some feedback, because I really didn't do anything. I didn't say anything. I just kind of like smiled and, went through it. And I didn't want to bring attention to the table because partly too, it's like, now what, people will blame me. I didn't do anything, so I don't know. I didn't, that's why I actually am not proud of how I handled it, because I really think I should have, signed to him or like took his ear and just kind of like went, yeah, no, don't do that. No good. No bono.
No, we need the drop from the Brad Pitt movie, Russ. Why is it escaping me right now? But the Italian. That drop we had in the old show.
Yeah, it's somewhere. It's somewhere in the pile.
You find it. Well, speaking of podcasts, I wanted to just quickly mention it's the 20th anniversary of Rounders, guys.
What?
It's the
holy! You could not have said a thing that make me feel older. That can't.
It's so crushing. It is so soul crushing to know that was 20 years ago.
Happy birthday!
There's a podcast Bill Simmons does called Rewatchables, and they take classic movies and they go through them. They spend an hour talking about them, how it had its impact on society, and stories from. How the movie did in theaters, where it gained steam, stories about the making of it. And they did one on Rounders that's fantastic. If you're at all interested in the movie and want to hear an hour of discussion about it, there's a podcast called The Rewatchables on the Ringer Network by Bill Simmons. Have a listen to that. They did one on Jaws, one of my favorite movies, top 5 movies for me all time. And the stories that they've unearthed from Richard Dreyfuss and others telling stories over the years about Jaws is really a fascinating listen if that movie at all interests you. So check out that podcast. Another thing to check out, Daniel, you found a pretty cool site this week.
Oh, yeah. These guys reached out to me. It's called contendersclothing.com. And it speaks to me because I don't know if most of the people in poker know that every year before the main event and during the World Series, I watch every single Rocky movie. So you want your T-shirts, your boxers, your Drago undies, right? You can go to contendersclothing.com and you can use promo code KIDPOKER20 and you'll get like a 20% discount on all the stuff. They sent me a bunch of stuff. There's like, I got Clubber Lang boxers. I got the America trunks that Rocky wore. Another shirt that says like Rocky beats Apollo 1979 or something like that. So check it out. There's some cool stuff on there. And it certainly speaks to me as a massive Rocky fan.
And there's
including Rocky 5?
I like them all, man. Rocky 5. It's so funny. When I was in a relationship with that girl that I was with before, she was very like sobby, like womany kind of stuff. And her favorite one was Rocky 5 because it was like just all about the relationship between the father and the son and all that kind of stuff. And it's like universally considered the worst of the Rocky movies, but that was her favorite, which was a telltale sign that this wasn't a match.
Terrence said they also have a bunch of stuff from Karate Kid. Sweep the leg. There's a Sweep the Leg shirt. No Mercy Ali shirt, which I like. So there's a bunch of stuff there.
Excellent. I'm cruising their website right now. Yep, they got some WWE stuff too for people who are into that. Yeah. All
right.
Fascinating. I'll check it out.
News, boys.
What in the world is going on?
Fake, disgusting news.
All right, most of the poker world is watching the Aria Casino this week. The Poker Masters is in full swing. We have, I believe, event 7. The main event is kicking off today. Final table from yesterday, event 6 as well. There was an interesting development before we get into some of the results, and I wanted to get you guys' take on this. Stefan Sondheimer, who won last year, Daniel, you praised him as a great young player. He won the Purple Jacket, and before the event started, he announced that he wasn't going to be playing this year. And I think, we think back to the World Series of Poker. He tweeted out his sort of bad run that he was on, including the $1 $1 million buy-in. And he said, this is what he said: I don't think it's the best value of the year, and I have private things during that week that I value a lot. So I decided to skip and watch some of the streams. I'm a bit sad for sure, but I'm happy with my decision. It's interesting because it shows some maturity from a young guy. It also might be impacted by his bad run, but wanted to get your thoughts, Daniel and Terrence.
Well, yeah, I mean, Stefan, I think a lot of it has to do with like a little bit of the bad run, but it's also about competition. As you guys know, WCOOP is running. There's also other festivals running at the same time online, and there's so many of these events now that people can pick and choose. Having said that, the fields have been outrageous. They've been outrageously good. Tom Marchese, who I spoke to about this, he thinks it's in part because a lot of the players from, the German contingent didn't show up, which I don't know that there's any sort of evidence we could point to make case for that. But the attendance has been actually really, really good, and the value has been there. So, he's happy with the decision, but I think if he sees the fields, he'll look and say okay, well, his value assessment, and I would have agreed with him before this Poker Masters. I didn't think it was likely to be very good, but we ended up having really good field sizes throughout. And, they're always tough because you have some of the best players in the world, but there was enough, of the, mediocre to weaker players in there that it made it really, really valuable.
Yeah, there's always sort of this game theory equilibrium thing that happens when, if a tournament is perceived to be tough, then some of the players on the margins won't show up, which will make the tournament a little bit softer, which in turn will make it a little bit tougher because people will be like, oh, the tournament's a little softer. So, eventually it reaches this sort of equilibrium point, in terms of toughness. Now, Adam mentioned sort of a sense of maturity or, what have you, sort of saying let's not feed the ego and just try to play the super tough tournament for pennies of EV. We've talked about this in previous weeks on the show. It's part of it has got to be the poker economy too, in that just money just isn't as easy as it used to be. I feel like if the super high rollers sort of existed, and I guess they existed in a different way in like the mid 2000s, we wouldn't have that as much. And it's not because people have gotten so much smarter with their egos. I think there's that to some extent. It's just that there isn't as much free money going around anymore. If you kind of like put really high buy-in tournaments in Las Vegas in like 2005 or something like that, I think they're probably drawing a lot of people who aren't very good at poker, but that's okay because those people are finding it so easy to make money at poker because everything else they're playing is incredibly soft. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It makes some sense for sure. Although I don't know that, like, I think that was before its time, right around 2005. And I will not necessarily push back, but say that, like, there has been plenty of, I mean, you know, for a lot of people, the cryptocurrency wave with the Bitcoin and stuff, there's been like an infusion of a lot of money. And again, a lot of these guys are resourceful where, you know, if they don't necessarily have a bankroll to play an entire Poker Masters, which modestly is like a $500,000 investment, they're selling pieces. They're, you know, they're making smart business decisions, micromanaging. And even though, you know, the poker boom was bigger in 2005 and the games were softer and high rollers would have likely been a lot easier, I don't know that they would have got off the ground this in the same way that they are now in terms of the consistent base. I honestly think the main reason that high rollers exist the way they do today still is Kerry Katz. Like literally one guy. It's like his toy. He's like, I want to play a high roller. Everyone's like, okay, let's play a high roller. So he's sort of the main cog in all of this, I think.
Do you get a sense that I think poker professionals are a little less, you know, degen than they were in sort of our earlier days, I guess, because it just, and not just in terms of playing like big buy-in tournaments, but in terms of just, you know, and I'm getting a little off topic, but in terms of things like doing sports bettings, going out and buying, you know, really expensive fancy dinners and bottles at nightclubs and that kind of stuff. And now like we sort of, I read that, you know, humorous tweet from Ben Wolinovsky last week that the Brazilians were meditating in the hallways. Like, do you get a sense that like poker is so much more of a job and so much more serious among the top sort of 0.01% than it was, you know, like certainly when you started out as a pro, you know, in like, what was it, the late 90s, and then when I started out as a pro in the mid 2000s, like it feels like it's just so much more, you know, they're much more business oriented, like you said.
Yeah, I would say the best analogy that I can think of as you were speaking is like, you know, you look at a Bryn Kenny who's a throwback, who we're playing 25K. He's like, come on, bro, we need 50s and 100s. And this is a guy that's taking significant action of his own. And, you know, he's a wild man. Like, he'll get it in there. And then you can, you know, you compare that to someone like Christoph Vogelsang, who knows precisely that if you folded a hand, if you missed a hand, that would be worth, you know, $1,117 in equity in the $1 million one drop, or that he's putting in exactly 2.2% of his bankroll into this event, and a rebuy would have 1.4. It's unbelievable how his brain works. Like, Christoph is wealthy, there's no question about it, but like his money is safe. Bryn Kenny, on the other hand, like this is a guy that's a throwback to the old school in the degen mold, which is like he's gonna fire. You know, this is a guy who, I don't know what his financial status is, but like if he had $1 million bankroll and there's 100K, he's gonna buy in and he's gonna rebuy too. Like this is he's not afraid. There's no fear in that man.
The other interesting thing for me is where this tournament is held, right? Because it's so important for a tournament like this to be in Las Vegas, given that you said, look, the Germans look at this maybe and think it's not going to be a good field. However, Daniel, you live in Las Vegas and you're going to drive down to the area. It's not that far for you. And if it's a good field, you can jump in. If it's not, or whoever it is that is in Vegas. But if this tournament is in Rosvadov, and you think, well, 2 weeks before the tournament, you're like, oh, well, this one's going to be a tough field. I'm not flying to Rosvadov, right? So they have no chance there. But in Las Vegas, you have, you know, Kerry Katz and some others that jump into these things.
Yeah, you need locals, right? Like, so one of the reasons why this thing, you know, still works is because Kerry lives here, and there's a bunch of locals like Marchese and Jake Schindler and, you know, some other like Seth Davies and Jason Coons and whatnot, Ike Haxton, Justin Bonomo. They're already here, so they don't have to travel for it. So if there's an event, they're just going to play. Now, for someone like Stefan, as we talked about, he has to make a decision about flights, hotels, travel. Is this worth it? What else? What are my other options? And then, of course, we discussed this on last week's podcast. You have the whole Canadian contingent who has to, in addition to all that, consider taxation. And then you have, you know, the Asian contingent, which has their own series. And so it's just become more difficult to like have 4 big majors a year that are all going to be attended by all the top players, because there's just, frankly, I think there's just too many of these things.
Yeah, and I wonder how much tournament organizers look at this and understand that they have to really work at providing recreational players for these tournaments for them to go, especially these high roller series, right? I mean, I think it becomes really important for the tournament organizers to think about how their marketing strategy goes.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what, it's been working. You know, I don't know how exactly we get these people, but in Vegas, you know, like this series has been well attended by non-professionals. Barcelona, or anytime you go to a spot like that, it was just well attended by a bunch of people I've never seen before. So I don't know necessarily that there's a specific way that you like market to a recreational, other than maybe like, you know, making it easy enough for them to get their money to where they need to go, and kind of having sort of concierge-like service for high rollers and things like that. But outside of that, I mean, I'm surprised. I'm just shocked. I can't really tell you how it's happening, but there's a good number of people that are just enjoying playing in these high rollers against tough fields.
All right, let's jump into some of the results real quick. David Peters wins event number 1, the 10K No Limit Hold'em. Again, this is the Poker Masters, a series of 7 events, a leaderboard. The winner takes down the coveted purple jacket, culminating in a 100K buy-in that starts today, event number 7. Event number 1 was 10K No Limit Hold'em. David Peters took that down. 69 entrants. Daniel, I want to ask you about the turnout in a minute. He wins 193,000, picks up 300 points towards the overall title there. I don't know if anybody saw or if you were around, Daniel or Terrence, or if you watched this online, but he took the worst hand and up against 3 or 4 times at the final table, and ended up under pairs, beating over pairs and stuff. He ran good. Dave was an awesome player, obviously, but he seemed to run pretty good in that. What's your take on sort of the turnout, not just in the first event, Daniel, but the overall thing? We talked about the Germans and the recreational players, but outside of that.
Well, yeah, that's what you would think, with several people not coming, like Stefan Sondheimer, Fedor Holtz. You got Adrian Mateo, Stephen Chidwick, all players that didn't attend. I expected numbers to be down, but they've been up. Like 69 for the first one, which is a 10K, typically going to draw a little better than some of the higher buy-ins. But further down the road, the last 25K had 66. The 50K buy-in just last night had 47. We expect pretty good numbers for the main event as well. So I think the attendance has been surprisingly good despite a lot of the top guys playing. And Tom really does believe that from an enjoyment perspective, that plays a role. Certain players not playing, like we had Doc Sands show up, and I like Doc Sands, I really do, but he's a miserable guy to play with, especially when you're like near the bubble. Like, you were 15 left in the tournament the other night, and there's 3 tables of 5, and it pays 10 spots, and he was doing the full 30 seconds tank every single time, right? And just was, nauseating. And he was claiming that, oh no, everybody's doing it. I'm like, yeah, people are tanking when they're getting check raised on the river. That's like a lot different than being under the gun and taking 30 seconds every time. So when people do stuff like that, it forced a soft hand for hand. And I do think we have had, and I won't name her. Well, oops, I said her, so it's going to be very easy to figure out. But I'll just say, Kathy Laney, she used to play these pretty regularly. Yep. And she didn't want to play with a lot of the German players because, they were habitually in mundane spots using their allotted time, which was the full 30 seconds. And she just didn't like playing anymore. So she quit. So I don't know, maybe there's something to be said about, who's playing, meaning, drawing in more recreational players.
Do you think there's a way to, the 30-second rule, bring up Dave Sands, is there a way to, after habitually using it every hand, to not allow him to continue doing that? Like, what's a modification of that rule do you think you could see?
I think we talked about it. I was sitting at the table with Kerry Katz. Well, first of all, I have an idea for sort of a chess clock type app that would be far better because it really punishes people who waste 20 to 30 seconds every time. But the other alternative that we can switch to is instead of 30 seconds pre-flop, we can switch to something in the neighborhood of 15 seconds and just give a lot more time banks. So we could almost have, because right now we have 3 1-minute time banks. You could do maybe 10 30-second time banks and make pre-flop decisions 15 seconds. So you only have 15 seconds to act pre-flop. If you need an extra time bank to make, for a decision, you throw out one, you get 30 seconds more. But after the flop, maybe you get 30 seconds for every decision. Because obviously, there's very few spots pre-flop where you really do need 30 seconds to tank. People are just wasting time to be balanced and stuff like that. And it's not worthwhile that time. Obviously, if you're getting 4-bet pre-flop, in a tough spot, maybe you have to think a little bit longer against the jam. But you know what? Then use a time bank. We just provide them. But we shouldn't allow guys to burn 30 seconds every time, and have no recourse.
Brandon Adams takes down event number 2. This is the 25K no limit hold'em 50 entrants. As Daniel said, he takes down 819,000. One of the hosts of this podcast was at the final table of this event. Daniel, I want to ask you about this hand that I read and make sure A, that it's correct, and B, what your thoughts were. I think you have 10s in position, and Brandon raises under the gun, you flat. The flop is 8-7-5 rainbow. He bets you call. 3 on the turn. He bets you shove. Is that right?
Nope, not right. Okay, so actually, it was an interesting situation from an ICM perspective. I was third in chips going in. Brandon was second. Jared was the chip leader. And the very first hand of the day, there was an interesting spot where Jared raises, and it was my big blind, and I had ace king. And that's normally a 3-bet spot. But considering, ICM, it might not always be because of where my chips were. So I flatted that one. Now, 2 hands later, Brandon raises in the cutoff. And I decided to just flat the button with 10s, which is typically a hand you can 3-bet with. But I decided to flat in this case. And the flop came 8-7-5. Brandon checks the flop. I bet quarter pot, which was about 60,000. And he check raises to 205. I call the check raise. Now the turn is an off 3. It's a backdoor flush draw. And he bets 405,000. I have 655 total. And he used a time bank here and took a lot of time. And I just felt like this is a spot where he's going to sometimes feel like he's value betting worse hands like pocket 9s and ace 8 or just even an 8. And there's a lot of potential draws he could have here. And it just felt like my hand was too high up in my range to fold. So I put it in and he had queens. And that was the end of me in that one, finishing 6th, which was pretty disappointing.
Event number 3, Keith Lear wins. This is a 37 entrants. That was the Keith Lear won the no limit hold'ems. Do you remember what event that was? Number 3.
It was the PLO. He won the 25K PLO.
Oh, right. 25K PLO. 37 entrants. You surprised at only 37 entrants for the PLO, or is that up from last year?
No, I think 37 is a pretty good number. Okay. I actually had a pretty interesting hand against Keith Lear in that tournament early on in the PLO. Well, I'll share it with you real quick. Sure. It's not a hard one. I limped with ace 4 spades, jack 10. He limps behind, and it's like 4 ways. The flop comes 8-4 deuce with 2 spades. So I have middle pair, nut flush draw, some overcards, backdoor straight draws, and whatnot. I bet the flop. Keith calls, and the turn card's a deuce, which is not a very good card for my hand at all. I check. He bets like close to pot, and I could probably just fold here and probably should, but I decided to call. And then the river's a queen of clubs. I checked, and he bet close to pot again. And I'm so sure he's bluffing here. But part of my fear was shit, what if he says you win and it's has two 7s or something like that. You know what I mean? Sure. So I ended up not using a time bank or whatever. I'm pretty sure he bluffed me in this hand, but it's a tough spot. In PLO, for those who don't play it much, you need a much stronger hand to call in certain spots. But he ended up showing me jack 9 of spades, which essentially tells me that it's 100% almost certain that he was bluffing. Oops.
All right. Event number 4 was the much talked about 10K short deck event. 56 entrants for the 10K short deck. And one of the interesting things was the final 6 players, and you mentioned this a little bit earlier, Daniel. Of the final 6, only 2 had played short deck in the past. Ike Caxton, Dominic Nietzsche, Maurice Hawkins, and Ryan Tosick were all playing the game for the very first time, and they end up making it to the final table. Just first off, Ike ends up winning, playing a game that he has never played again, as I mentioned. And all we had to do, of course, was mention how bad Ike runs in these big things for him to win. But playing the game for the first time, did that surprise you, Daniel, that 4 of the final 6 hadn't played it?
Well, let's look at the numbers, right? So 4 out of the final 6 had not played it. Now, there was 55 entrants in this thing. I would say that probably resembles the number of people that, going in hadn't played it. I think only probably a third of the people who entered this thing had played the game much before. So not all that surprising. It's a gambling game. There's a lot of variance. It's really beneficial to recreational players who like to get it in. And, if you're smart and you have some card sense, it's still poker. It's still hold'em. You just, have to sort of change your thought process in terms of some hand values.
All right, we'll talk.
Yeah, I think of that too. Just parlaying off that real quick to recreational players. Like, so if I would not play any of the events in the Poker Masters against this field for all the reasons we discussed about. I'm not like the elite cream of the crop, like poker player especially in these variants of poker. But if you forced me to play an event, there's no doubt that the short deck event is the event that I would feel I would be at the least disadvantaged because of exactly what Daniel said. Well, I mean, they're probably like 5 people, maybe 10 who are running some sims on short deck and probably have like a much better sense of understanding. But like the rest of the field has almost no experience in the game. They don't have charts. Like there's like it's whenever you create a game, and I think this is what PokerStars has tried to do with creating all these sort of made up silly games that they've tried to do over the years. But yeah, if you're gonna cater to sort of recreational players, this is sort of a way to do it, is to create a game that nobody's got too much experience in. I was just having a Twitter conversation, a brief one with Jen Shahadi about you guys have probably heard of chess where like the back row is all scrambled and it's completely randomized.
Oh, I haven't heard that.
Yeah. Well, I guess Bobby Fischer invented this, and I was just thinking, like, the problem with chess as an entry level game is that if you're somebody like me who doesn't study chess at all, like you're at a gigantic disadvantage to somebody who just understands openings. But if you're a chess player and you don't study openings, you're probably not that much at a disadvantage. I feel like short deck is sort of the poker variation of that right now.
Yeah, no question. Like, actually, speaking of solvers and whatnot in terms of the game, Kerry Katz is the one that's giving everybody like the short deck calculator to figure out what the odds are of hands. And like, just for like, so that people understand how much gamble there is to this game, it's a lot more like PLO. If you get it in with pocket aces and you're up against Jack 10 suited, it's like 57-43. So you're essentially in a coin flip with aces against Jack 10 suited. So, like it basically means like it's, you can get it in. You never have that big of an edge, so just getting it in every hand is like not all that awful.
Event number 5 on the schedule was the 25K no limit hold'em, 66 entrants, created a prize pool of over 1.6 million, 400,000 for first. Once again, our trusty co-host here made the final table of the 25K no limit hold'em event. This time on the short stack. Daniel, what happened there?
Oh, I felt like Kerry Katz. I started with 7 big blinds. And like Harry's just this guy who's like, he's literally spent most of his tournament life between 7 and 10 bigs. He just doesn't punt. He like waits for the best hand. And like I essentially did that. I went through the blinds, which is a big blind ante and a blind, and went in through all the way. I didn't get even nothing remotely close to a playable hand. So I was all in on the big blind with 5 deuce of clubs against 2 8s of Ben Yu. It was really unique because I was so far behind whoever was in 5th. Like the chip leader, I had like 200K. The chip leader had 2 million. And like the guy in 5th had 1 million. So I wasn't even like sniffing any sort of like laddering or anything. But yeah, that was like just a grind. But listen, like Kerry Katz, he sort of is always in that mold I told you. But like these are such crapshooty tournaments and they're turbo formats that it's not all that unreasonable to take 7 bigs, double up, and then like win the tournament. It's going to happen a lot more often in a fast-paced structure than it would in like a slower, longer time tournament.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that's true because your percentage of winning a tournament is always proportionate to the percentage of chips you have, right? So if you have like 5% of the chips and everybody's equal, you should still be 5% to win the tournament regardless of the structure.
Yeah, I don't know that that's true necessarily because, with ICM considerations, when the stacks are much deeper, bigger stacks don't have to take unnecessary gambles or get it in really light and stuff, but when the stacks are so shallow, you're kind of like mathematically priced in to take a lot of coin flips. And, you can't just be like if a small blind jams, for 12 bigs, you can't fold like ace-6 offsuit. You just kind of have to call.
Yeah, I think there will be more like shifting back and forth between stacks, like who's in first and who's in last. But I don't think necessarily that the structure dictates the percentage chance of winning like that much. I mean, yeah, you're right that ICM will come into play a little bit, but I think it's more that you'll just see somebody go from like first to last or last to first more often than not, more than you will seeing. I mean, it's a bit of a semantic point, but like, yeah, I think still if you have X percentage of the chips in play, you're still about X% to win regardless of structure.
Ali Imsirovic wins the event, his first Poker Masters win, third big tournament win of the year. The player of the year in the Poker Masters after 5 events looks like this. Brandon Adams made final tables the first 3 events. He has 510 points. Ike has 480. Ben Yu 360. Ali 360 as well. And David Peters has 300. Keith Lear 300. So it's still.
How many does Daniel Negreanu have?
Like 120. I came 6th twice. 6 is the worst place to finish because for 6 you get the same amount of points as you would for a 10th. Like if you cash 10th, it's just like it tapers off there. So it's like literally the worst bubble spot you could finish.
So how many points is the winner of the 100K?
It's only 350. So yours truly is officially out of contention.
I didn't look at the event 6 final table to see who was in contention on this list, but it looks like there's 6 or 7 people that can still take this thing down. The purple jacket, so to speak, brings some prestige for sure in this event. Yeah,
this guy Ali, who's a massive chip leader. He's a massive chip leader in this final event. Partly because I punted to him last night with 12 left. Again with 2 10s. So it's so funny because it was like the same flop, same kind of situation. The blinds were 8-15. I make it 35,000 in the cutoff, starting with 340 with pocket 10s. Ali, who's on a big stack already, he flats from the small blind, and it's heads up to an 8-6-5 rainbow flop. Yeah, he checks. I bet 25K, which is quarter pot. He calls the 25K. The turn is the king of diamonds, which brings backdoor diamonds. And here's where I just absolutely punt. He checks, and I thought about, how often I want to be betting here and checking back, and what if I bet? Can I actually bet fold and stuff like that? So I don't know. I didn't think long and hard enough about it, and I threw out 50,000, and he check raised me all in. And now I have the 10 of diamonds in my hand, right? So that blocks a lot of his bluffs. If he turned like 9-10 of diamonds or 10 jack of diamonds or something like that, which is very possible, I block those. So it's an easy fold, right? Well, I said, nah. I got stubborn and felt like he was, he's going to be wider than that. And he had king 7 of clubs. So I was basically dead to 2 outs, which is pretty stupid. If I check back the turn, the river's a 4, puts, the 4 card straight out there. I may lose a bet on the river or something, but I'd still be in. So absolute, 60-yard punt from yours truly. Very, very tired in that event, not playing my best for sure. And, that was a missed opportunity for me.
All right, let's move on. We did mention short deck, so I really want to circle back and talk about this for a second. PokerStars is going to roll out a strip deck game for their client, which I thought was pretty interesting. Again, for those that don't know, 2s through 5s are stripped out. And to take this for PokerStars to take this to the sort of the masses, so to speak, and I think it will do a huge thing to grow this game and the interest in it. And Andrew Robles come out. Everybody says it's their favorite game now. They don't like playing No Limit Hold'em anymore. It's boring, etc. But Daniel, I just wanted to get your take on PokerStars rolling out strip deck, and if there was any discussion sort of on a macro level on the economy and how that would affect it.
Yeah, well, so first of all, it's very, very easy to do. It's very easy to program, right? It's a very simple change. It's the same game, essentially. Well, actually, there's a couple other, things you have to switch. You have to program in the fact that flushes beats full houses and the ante structure, whatnot. But it's not all that difficult for elite programmers. So why not do it? If people want to play it, and it seems to be growing in certain areas, in certain parts of the world, they're playing a lot more of it in Asia. I don't see why not. Like, you're going to throw out some games occasionally, and people are going to go, this is really stupid. We don't want to play this. Okay, so then it dies, and maybe we create something else. I think the innovation's good, and there's certainly a market for this type of game. It is much more gamble heavy, probably going to be, honestly, it's probably much better for recreational players in general. As I said, 10 jack suited all in against aces is 43%. So, that's going to make a professional's edge a lot smaller, which is good for the longevity of any sort of ecosystem.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to having mixed short deck and regular deck so that people can just be really confused all the time.
Which game are we playing? Oh, no. So one of the games you did mention, the thing you did mention there was sometimes they're going to bring games out and they don't stick. And one of those is the version called Unfold, which was PokerStars rolled out in a bunch of jurisdictions where you could pay to unfold your cards after you see the flop. Didn't sound like it got much legs, and they're thrown back into the water, that one, Daniel.
Yeah, I mean they're gonna continue to do that. You're always gonna look to innovate, see what people enjoy, see if they like it, and if it catches on, then you make it a staple in the lobby. It's not all that different than kind of what you see with like McDonald's, not that I'm a patron, when they do the McRib promotion. You throw out the McRib for a little limited time, people keep buying it, you do it. But if it becomes like so popular, maybe, I don't know, maybe you add it to the menu and you keep it there. So I think like constantly coming out with, we had another, the different format that was, temporary, that lasted a little while. I think it's a good idea. Why not like be creative? I think it's also super important for online poker's future to always innovate, because as we know, with the advance of solvers and the advance of artificial intelligence and things like this, we're nearing closer and closer to solves for poker. So if you change something about the game, it throws the solvers off, and it continues to, give humans a chance to survive a little bit longer before, we're all Terminator, Arnold Schwarzenegger owned.
Hey, are you guys at all surprised, sort of expanding on this topic a little, that 3, 4, 5 years ago that PokerStars didn't decide to do some OFC pineapple, when that was the big craze? It turns out to be, now that we're say here in 2018, it wasn't the next big thing. But is that a result of, computational power being too valuable, and you can solve something like open face a little bit easier, but like people started creating so many variants, and they were just playing it on like phone apps and stuff like that, and like made by random indie companies. Are either of you surprised that Stars never rolled that out?
I'm not surprised, because I remember speaking to Isai, who was that open face was around back then as well, and one of the main reasons it never made it online is, well, first of all, it's not really a poker game. But secondly, and not that that's like, disqualifying it on its own, but the problem is like, how in the world can you possibly stop someone playing with like a perfect bot? It's just rampant with like, there's literally no possible way. Like, people could be playing on their laptop and then on their phone or whatever else having like the exact correct play solved. So,
you can kind of make that argument about limit hold'em today, right? Like, why would you allow heads up limit hold'em when it's essentially a solve game?
Well, I think because with limit hold'em, there are some things with poker specifically that you can use, and I won't go too in depth into the security measures that we take. But like, it's easy. There are things you can do. There are measures you can take to catch people cheating in a poker game that you couldn't in an OFC.
Yeah.
Okay. The game rumored to be introduced in the near future is a game called Fusion that combines no limit hold'em, Omaha, and the aforementioned Pineapple. The structure is the same as PLO, except 2 hole cards are discarded. 2 of your 4 hole cards are discarded after the flop. Thought that was an interesting one. I haven't really thought through how that would work, but there's rumors that might be coming, Daniel.
Yeah, why not, right? Like, that seems like actually a fun game, very reminiscent of like house games I used to play in, where we had a lot of, crazy, weird, wild formats. This one seems like, there's a lot of strategy to it. I guess my only not real concern, but is, from speed perspective, is like, so when people are having to discard post flop, like, how much longer does that take? But we do have triple draw already online, and that's a discard game. So, and that seems to work okay. So I
was
can't
going to say triple draw is made for online poker, right? Because you can, when you're playing triple draw, like in a live environment, one of the things that's like really important that new players screw up on a lot of times is when they're in position, they make it obvious how many they're going to discard. Yeah. But like triple draw online, you can actually click your discards while you're waiting for your action, and then just click the auto discard and turn. I just played the triple draw yesterday. Like for half an hour or however long before I busted. But triple draw is like made for the internet, I think.
Indeed. Quickly, Daniel, I wanted to mention your Platinum Pass giveaway. For those that don't know, Platinum Pass, or the PokerStars Championship, is a $20K buy-in event coming up at the 25K buy-in at the PokerStars Caribbean Adventure this year coming up. Daniel, there's a lot of excitement. PokerStars is driving a ton of traffic to this tournament. The value in this huge buy-in is going to be probably unprecedented in poker history, I'm going to guess, with the amount of people that are going there without sort of a ton of experience in high rollers. And you're giving away a Platinum Pass, aren't you?
Yeah, so this is one event that I would look at and say, if you are a grinder and an online grinder looking for value, it is really like a can't miss play, because we're doing about 300 to 320 giveaways of Platinum Passes, which is a $25,000 entry plus $5,000 in spending for travel and hotels. In addition to that, we're talking about an extra $1 million for first prize. So this likely will be the biggest $25,000 buy-in event in the history of poker. And one of the cool things that PokerStars did was, a lot of the ambassadors in their own unique kind of interesting ways were giving away platinum passes to their fans. Like you've got the Vloggers in Paradise one, which a lot of them are doing. Liv and Igor came up with like sort of some deep, interesting quiz type thing. And for me, I wanted to do something that essentially that speaks to me. And part of what I believe is, and it's interesting because we're going to talk about this, part of what I believe is creates happiness is the gift of giving, right? So I'm giving this, which feels great, but I wanted to give the people who are receiving this platinum pass the opportunity to feel the joy of giving as well. So for me, what I'm asking people to do, and if you're listening to this, you can still do this. There's still time. You can go onto my Twitter with the hashtag #DonateWithDaniel and create like a 2-minute video or less on YouTube or whatever, and explain to me who do you play for. So who would you play for if you had the opportunity to come to Bahamas for free, play in an elusive, like crazy big event, and you could donate half of that money to a charity or a foundation or a cause of your choice. And so we're going to go through all the video submissions, and then we're going to pick one that we think makes sense. So it's not good enough to just, leave a message. You have to create a video and then use the hashtag #DonateWithDaniel, and then we'll be choosing from that. But I don't know. I'm a big believer in giving, and this is an opportunity to like do a double whammy when it comes to giving, where you're giving someone and they're getting to give as well.
Sticking with PokerStars, the online tournament community, obviously knee-deep right now in World Championship of Online Poker at PokerStars and PowerFest at Party Poker. A pretty amazing story has emerged from the World Championship of Online Poker. At the beginning of the series this year, Dan Kelly had the record for most WCOOP championships. He had 5. A couple of people had 3. And one of those players is Dennis Strebkov. And he went ahead and won 3 in a week, and so he got up to 6. He's won another one in the interim, so now he's up to 7, I believe, total. A couple ahead of our boy Sean Deeb and others. But pretty amazing story. He's known as Adrenaline 710 on PokerStars, winning 4 events this year, taking his total all the way up to 7. Dan, pretty cool.
Man, that sounds to me like what I'd describe as a heater.
That is known as the Eric Seidel, and others have done that over the past in high rollers for sure. Pretty cool. If you're still looking to get into some online tournaments, you're at home, you're listening, you're playing online poker. If you're in a jurisdiction where you can play, check out PokerStars, and also Party Poker has a bunch of tournaments going on right now.
Just playing poker on internet.
Moving on, Daniel quickly mentioned there about happiness in poker, and one of the things that popped up this week was a blog entry by Dan Smith, and he came clean about some of his sort of mental struggles that he has. He's very open about some of the things that go through his mind occasionally, and he did a blog discussing suicidal thoughts amongst other things. And some depression and some other things. Did everybody read that? And I wanted to get sort of, before we just dive into a whole bunch of stuff, just a general sort of reaction to Dan really opening himself up to everybody.
Yeah, no, I certainly read it. I retweeted it. I thought it was great. I spoke to Dan about it, and I just, wanted to make sure that I acknowledged him for being so vulnerable and open about his own personal struggles and how big of an impact I think someone like him can have. I mean, you see a guy like Dan Smith, who's obviously like a genius. He was a chess champion, one of the best poker players in the world. And I think for the everyday person, whether that's dealing with depression or dealing with sadness, when they see that, they're like, okay. I mean, I think it gives people a sense of they're really not alone. And I thought Dan did a really good job of sort of, being open and honest, but also just kind of sharing, not necessarily, giving advice to other people, but sort of sharing what's worked for him in order to, wake up with a purpose and feel happiness. And it was interesting because a lot of what he shared is very in line with some of the things that I believe is very, very important or that is worthwhile for people that are, for everyone, whether you're dealing with depressive issues or not. So I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I read it too, and I thought it was great. One thing that I took away from this is, well, first of all, I'll say one thing is that I think in the last sort of 5 years, one of the most positive things to sort of come out of society and make one of the better things trends that I've noticed is that there's a lot less stigma about talking about mental health. It's sort of like suicidal thoughts, mental health issues. I feel like when I was, in my teens, in my early 20s or something like that, it's something that, you were crazy, or there was something wrong with you if you were depressed and you had depressive thoughts and you had suicidal thoughts, and you listened to too much like depressing music or whatever it had. And no, people are starting to realize that this is an actual medical condition, that that's a pathology. And Dan writes, very early on in the article, I've happened to have it up right now, so I'll just read it verbatim. He talks about the hypothesis that traumatic events involving stigma can cause a lot more long-term harm to the person than events without a stigma. The explanation for this is the stigma prevents people from talking about the traumatic event with friends and family. And then Dan goes on to talk about how he had a very close person in his life, and still it was extremely difficult for him to talk with that person about, having depressive thoughts or suicidal thoughts. And yeah, like that's the kind of thing, like that's what's so troubling about things like suicidal thoughts, is that the people who most desperately need the help feel like they can't talk with anybody about it. Like if you can't talk about the matter with the person who's the closest to you, or people that are very close to you, then no wonder it's so hard to overcome. No wonder it's so difficult to deal with, and no wonder why it takes so many lives and destroys so many lives. Because if you can't talk about, what else can you not talk about with the people that's the most important to your life?
Well, yeah, and one of the things, what happens when you have that stigma, like you just said, Terrence, that makes me think, and why it's so great for Dan to come out and talk about this stuff. Because what happens when there is that stigma, for me, I think, is people self-diagnose, and because they're afraid to talk to somebody else and get some, context or some input from other people, they're going to go, they're going to self-diagnose, and they're not in any position to do that. They're not, first of all, they're, in the middle of it. So it's hard for them to take everything becomes emotional, and their biases and stuff. So, it becomes very difficult. And then what happened when they self-diagnose and say something like, "Oh, well, I've had suicidal thoughts, therefore I'm suicidal." I mean, I think it's probably, I can't imagine somebody who hasn't thought about, oh, what happens if I jump off a bridge today? Now, some people think about it all the time, and some people it's a passing thought, but it doesn't mean you're suicidal. However, if you self-diagnose because you can't talk about it, that's where you run into problems.
Yeah, there's something that I know you have the show notes as well, and something that Dan said about feeling strongly that we are not our thoughts. And I think it's important for people to make that distinction of what he really means by that. And I think what he means by that is, like, a lot of people say, for example, grow up believing that, their thoughts are that they're not worthy of being loved. Nobody would love them because they're too fat. Nobody would love them because they're not smart enough, because they don't have enough money, and all those things. And those are thoughts that person has about that themselves. Is it true? Is that who that person is, an unlovable human being that no one would love? Chances are no. But when we allow our thoughts to overtake, when we feed into our thoughts so much that are negative, and we start believing in that, then it becomes somewhat of a self-fulfilling prophecy. Because someone who is going through that and feels that way likely is going to create an environment or like an aura about them that is more difficult to love and is more difficult to find a relationship or things like that. So I think a lot of like what Dan has done is tried to use, working out, eating healthy, meditation, things that will make him feel better about himself on a more positive light. There's a lot of talk about, hey, the guru of all, Mr. Phil Hellmuth, wrote a book called #Positivity, right? So clearly, it's great to see so many people in poker spend, and I've noticed this in the high roller community more than any other, how much time they spend on sort of not mental health necessarily, but mental growth, spiritual growth, emotional intelligence. I did a course that I know is controversial because people don't understand that, never did it. I did it like 6 years ago called Choice Center, which is essentially not much different. It's about meditation. It's about journaling, and a lot of the things that Dan is putting into practice on his own, based off of like a lot of literature and past people who have, use these tools for happiness. And it's pleasant to see so many people finding different ways. A lot of people go to Burning Man and do drugs and find this, but there's probably ways to do it without LSD, but I don't know.
Yeah, well, and recognizing some of the things that help you is fantastic, and being, sort of self-reflective enough to go, hey, if I go run 2 miles, I feel better. Like, endorphins, whatever it is, I worked out, I felt better. If I had salad for a couple of days instead of pizza every meal, I feel better. So instead of just continuing behavior that gets you caught in a circle of feeling negative, thinking negative, having depressive thoughts. Finding things that help you, like Dan has, he is self-reflective enough to understand what makes him feel better. I think that's so important, and it's great for him to talk about, so other people can start, think of that. Like, how many people that read that, probably were spurred to start thinking about things that make them feel happy, and surrounding yourself with people who make you feel happy, right? I mean, I think as you get older, you probably learn. It takes a while because, when you're young and you're in high school or whatever, you want to be socially accepted by everybody. And you learn along your lifetime that you don't need to be socially accepted by everybody. You want to be socially accepted by the people that you value, you share values with, and you want to spend time with. And all those things, a lot of those things come with age as well.
Yeah, I think one of the other big takeaways from Dan's vlog, and I hope that you guys have a chance to read it, is that it doesn't require a monumentally massive plan where you're going to do 45 new things. Start small. If weight is an issue for you, start walking. Maybe cut out soda. One little thing, and then once you start to see like success and results and keeping your integrity, where you're able to implement new things into your life that'll be beneficial to make you happier, that breeds more success. Little small wins as you go, rather than looking at this task as like a 3,000-mile journey and never taking the first step because you're like, well, I'll never get there. Well, you know what? Take the first step, and then let's go from there. Take the second step, and we'll see how you go there.
All right, let's move on. One of the other things that's come out in the last little while, and this happens pretty much every year, I think, but it seems to pick up some more steam this year because there's some not just poker people talking about it, but casino people talking about it. And this is the thought of the World Series of Poker moving the event to one of their properties on the Strip, specifically Caesar's Palace. They are apparently trying to get rid of the Rio Hotel. I can't imagine why, but so this thought of moving the World Series of Poker and the massive crowd that it brings every year to the Strip is going to create, well, some good things and some bad things. I wanted to get your take, guys, on what you think.
Well, first of all, I don't know that necessarily it's going to be, Caesars. I mean, I've heard rumors as well, and, some inside discussions about maybe like, where the link is in that area over there. And I think what people are going to see is that, a lot of people get sick of the Rio or whatever. They don't like the Rio, but like, it's actually, for the World Series, it's a great facility for running this event. It's like pretty big. It's pretty easy to get to traffic wise, parking wise, and all those things. And, maybe you don't like the food options as much, but I would say that if I had to bet, like if you move it, would that be like an enhanced experience for the World Series of Poker, or likely more bitching and complaining? I'm betting a lot on bitching and complaining because it's typically very common of poker players to do that anyway. And they're resistant to change for the most part, but a change to the Strip could be problematic for a lot of reasons, I think.
Yeah, I would not only agree with Daniel, but be even more stronger on that. I was like, if it goes to the Strip, like I might not go because I do my best to avoid the Strip. Like when I'm in Vegas, like I lived in Vegas for 2 years, probably went to the Strip like a dozen times. Like I hate it. I hate driving there. I hate trying to find parking at every Strip casino. Like Daniel said, the Rio's pretty good for what it is. I mean, I basically treat the World Series of Poker as like it ends essentially at the Starbucks, right? Like I never go anywhere past the Starbucks when we're talking about the Rio Convention Center. It's like Daniel said, it's easy to get to. You get that back parking on Twain. You take Dean Martin and Industrial Drive. Like you don't have to deal with any of the major Strip traffic. Caesars, I don't believe, has any other off-Strip property, right? I think Rio's absolutely the only one. So yeah, I do not want them to move to the Strip. Like please don't move to the Strip.
I think Daniel hit it on the head too as well, that the people, they don't like the Rio, but they don't realize how good it is compared to what it could be. I mean, the size of that place, the Amazon, and it's evolved over time. It's much better than it was even 4, 5, 6 years ago. They've really, I mean, we could do without the hucksters in the hallway, selling us batteries or solar crap or whatever. But that part of the stuff, I mean, you look at the rooms, the size, the efficiency that they've come up with. I think it's a great place. The food sucks in a lot of places, and there's troubles with the rooms or whatever. But you're going to find that if it ends up being at the Link or wherever else, and then have to deal with the Strip as well. So, we'll see. I guess is the end result there. Roscoe, let's get on to some tweets.
You're going surfing on the internet.
At Demon Girl Danielle Anderson, do you think it's okay to call the clock on somebody in a cash game? Part 2, do you wish that collectively poker players would call the clock more frequently in a cash game? I'll quickly kick things off. I think it's fantastic to call the clock in a cash game in certain spots. There's when you're playing cash, it's generally going to be, there'll be some bigger decisions. It's for, maybe more big blinds than it would be in a, 30 or 40 in a tournament. I guess it's your life too. So it might be no different, but if you're talking about a decision at a PLO, for, a couple hundred big blinds, it's tougher. But there's a point of reasonable and there's a point of unreasonable, and I have no problem with people calling the clock on me in cash games if it's a reasonable call, and I wish people would do it more frequently.
I think the threshold should be a little bit higher. I call the clock less in a cash game than I would in a tournament, simply because you don't have the increased blinds and antes that you're going to have in a tournament. So I would say the threshold should probably be slightly higher in a cash game, but yeah, you still do it. Especially, most higher stakes cash games you're paying time, so everybody at the table is essentially paying for you to think. So yeah, I think you obviously have the right, but I think the threshold's a little higher than a tournament where I'm a little quicker to call the clock.
Yeah, and that was essentially the point I was going to make, is that it's somewhat relevant whether it's a rake game or a time game, because in a rake game, in a time game, you could make the case that like I'm paying for this time, and this person is like eating up the session fee that I paid to play for this half hour, this hour. In a rake game, you can't necessarily make that argument. Having said that, you can say like, well, I'm a winner in this game and it's going to affect my hourly rate. But bottom line, it's just like for game flow and for the health and of the game, it's like if people are habitual with their tanking and it's like someone that's doing it consistently, the clock should be called on them aggressively. If this is a player who normally just acts really quickly, looks at his cards, folds, whatever, and now he needs like 5-6 minutes for a tough all-in on the river, yeah, I don't think that would be an appropriate time to call the clock, because this person is showing respect outside of this. It's only when a behavior type becomes abusive in terms of like the Doc Sands mold, where you're like literally purposely just have 7 deuce offsuit and are just wasting people's time. With people like that, I give them very little wiggle room.
The only time I've ever seen a clock called on somebody in a cash game is when they've asked for it to be called on themselves. People do that all the time.
I love that. I've done that in the main event of the World Series. I did that once.
And so Nick Schulman tweeted, and I saw Daniel retweet this, so I won't take the credit for finding it, but it's an amazing tweet. He said, going to stay about my business today in this Poker Masters 50K, and by stay about my business, I mean continue to play too tight because my bankroll is a little iffy right now, and then overcompensate and go ham in weird spots I don't understand against versus great players. LFG.
This is my favorite tweet I've seen in years. Like I saw Nick and I just had to take my hat off. That is like so Nick Schulman. It's hilarious to me.
Yeah. Speaking of being open about, your abilities and different things, that's awesome.
I've never heard somebody like voice that. I think everybody's kind of done this in a tournament or in a cash game where you're in a little bit over your head.
If you've never at least seen somebody play super tight for a really long time and then just like show up and all their chips are in the middle and you're just wondering like, why isn't all their money in the middle with this hand? Like you probably just started playing poker last week.
Quickly mention that this poker podcast is brought to you by Daniel Negreanu's Masterclass of Poker. Daniel, I wanted to get an update on the Masterclass, some feedback on it. Are you doing more videos? Where are we at with Masterclass?
So, look, anytime you create some content or you create a course or whatever, you're a little bit nervous in terms of like, well, are people going to like it? Like you don't want it to suck. You want it to be great. And I've been like so overwhelmed with the positive responses I've gotten. I've gotten people like, watching it and really loving it. And I hope there was no holds barred. Like I really tried to go as deep as I possibly could without going like, part of what I explained to, I don't know if I said in the last podcast, is like, Masterclass likes to go high end. They want to make sure that their customers get like, the real good stuff. And I asked them, was like, okay, do you want like poker nerd high end or do you want like mainstream high end? And I gave them a little taste of both. And I think, the poker nerd one was a little too outside the scope. But the people that aren't, taking in the course, I feel like are really getting a lot of value out of it. And all of the entire course is out now. And so, if you want to check it out, you can go. You can also, like I said, you can just get my course on the poker, or you can get a pass to all of them, which is not all that much more expensive. I don't know the exact prices off the top of my head, but I love doing that because I get to watch a little bit of like Kasparov teaching chess, and there's a whole bunch of great high-end people at the top of their industries doing master classes, and the production quality is top-notch.
Yeah, I want to watch yours, Daniel, but no offense, I really want to watch the Scorsese on filmmaking.
Yeah, go for it.
How do we make it this far without talking Erik Karlsson and Max Pacioretty, by the way?
I don't know, man. I was like, we got to do it. We got another 3-hour podcast we could do on these two, the Erik Karlsson for a bag of several bags of pucks.
Yeah. My favorite tweet so far for that trade is there was one of the Hockey Insiders tweeted the deal and reported on what Ottawa got back, and the guy from Ottawa says, "Okay, who did we trade?" It's like, yeah, what are we doing here? No, for sure. Fun. We didn't get any mail this week, Ross. Our email address is datpokerpod, or is it Dat Poker Podcast? .pokerpod?
Just datpokerpod at gmail.com.
At gmail.com. Send us your emails so we can read them on the air. Our Twitter accounts, our various Twitter accounts are at RealKidPoker, for Daniel Negreanu, at T-Chan Poker for Terrence. Roscoe, you are
at producer Ross.
At producer Ross, and I am at A Schwartz Poker with the T. Thanks so much for listening. Thanks you guys for getting together. Daniel, great. Good luck. Great run on a couple of events to get to the final table, but try and bink that 100K today. You're going to play, I guess? Well,
yeah, it starts in about 45 minutes. I'm going to go to the I'm not going on time. I'm tired anyway. I'm going to go to the gym, get a sweat on, and show up late. Today's a special one. The 100K is a 3-day event, so it's hour-long levels. You get a shit ton of chips. So I'll do my best to make a run in that one.
Awesome. And thanks out there for listening each week, and subscribe and send us a 5-star rating or a 4-star rating or a terrible rating if that's what you feel our show is. But give us some feedback, and we will talk to you next week.